Now let's cover how to use brushes and begin to block off these areas around our curved road. So let's say we don't want to use terrain and we want to use a brush. So we're going to use the same principles that we used when we were creating our curved roads. So let's first set a texture, something different than the road. So I'm going to use this parking lot texture for now. And then I'm going to use the block tool and make sure that under objects it's set to arch. I'm going to the top viewport and we need to draw out a template. The template is going to be double the size of what we have for our 90-degree type curve. This road was set to 256, so we need to draw a template out to 512. If I simply set this to 256 by 256, we have no space for our curve to curve around and create the brush. So we need to set it to 512. And after setting this to 512, we can see that we have some space here. Once I have my 512 by 512 brush created, I'm going to click enter. Under wall width needs to be half the size of the road. So we had 256 width for the road and it needs to be half that, so it's 128. Number of sides needs to match to number of sides of our curved surface, which was set to 8. Arc 90, because we have a 90-degree turn in a 90-degree road, and then start angle 90 is fine. Click OK, and if we take our brush, we move it and it lines up perfectly. Now, we didn't really block off our road because we still have a curved surface. So what we need to do next is we need to go into the vertex tool, and then we need to take each of these brushes and control the vertices and just drag them to line up, so that way we have a perfect square brush that lines up with a curved surface and then extends out, and I'm just going to keep dragging them till they match. And I may need to rework some of these so they're more uniform, and I need to drag this up. So now if I go into the perspective viewport, we have a brush that's blocking in of inside our curved surface. And if I wanted to raise this up a bit, I can just go and take this brush, raise it up, and now we have a raised brush that's blocking off our 90-degree turn. So now if I wanted to block off this wide road, the steps are very similar. If we wanted to work with the outer curve, we need to block off an area that's going to be 1024 by 1024. Since this brush is a lot wider, and if we create 512 by 512, our brush is going to match the road itself, which is not what we want because we don't have any space for the outer curve. So we need to double that and set it to 1024 by 1024. Now for the inner curve, we need to work with creating a small wedge right in here, and we need to deal with creating a template that's going to be set where these 2 points meet, and they need to match right where the road begins. So something like this. Let's go in the perspective viewport, and then once we have our template, we need to click enter. So the arch properties, wall width is going to be set at 64. Number of sides has to match the road. 90 degrees, that's the arc. Start angle 180. This is good. Preview, and then click OK. Now if we take this brush, it lines up perfectly on the inner side. And then if we go into the side view, we can raise this up, thus creating a curved sidewalk that blocks off the road and this gap. Now we can do the same thing by extending these points, but if you wanted to create a wedge, let's move this out of the way. We would do the same thing, 256 by 256, making sure that this area from the brush to the other brush, from one end of the curved road to the other, its template brush lines up. Then we're going to the properties, and wall width we're going to set it to 128, which is half the size of the road, and we can see that in the preview it creates a complete wedge. And everything else is going to be the same. Click OK, and now we have a wedge that we can just put right in here, and we have a perfect wedge that closes off and creates this, which closes off this curved surface. And then we can raise it if we want to create a sidewalk, or we can create something else. Maybe this would be some kind of a tunnel. Or we can take this brush and we can raise this all the way up and work with the brush this way, depending on what we were creating. So using the brushes to block off the area gives you another element of blocking off your roads if you don't want to use terrain. If you wanted to use terrain to block this off, and instead of using a flat terrain like we did over here in this example, you wanted to have more raised terrain where it comes off as a cliff or a mountain, let's delete this for a second. Let's take a brush and let's do that. I'm going to duplicate my brush and move it over here. I'm going to extend this out, bring it maybe over here, so the brush covers the gap and it goes right into the road itself. Now I'm going to raise this brush up, something like this, and then I'm going to apply a texture. I'm going to use the same texture that we used before, and then I'm going to go to the face edit sheet, select these two faces. I can also select the top face if I want, but I'm going to just show you just these two faces. So selecting these two and nothing else, I'm going to go to displacement and hit create. I'm going to use the powers of 2 and then going to paint geometry, and here I'm going to use the X axis and Y axis, and I'm going to push this terrain so it matches the side of the road. I'm going to change this over to Y, push it in the other direction, and I'm going to do this for going all the way up. Now once I have this corner begin to round out, I'm going to again switch to X-axis and push it more back. And I'm trying to have this be very uniform to where no one point is being pushed into the other. So I don't want something like this to be happening where my texture is being stretched out and this tessellation is becoming irregular. So these squares, you want to keep them uniform as much as possible. So I keep pushing these points and then slowly continue expanding them onto the other part of the terrain. I guess I can increase the radius, I can increase the distance. So this is how you would block off using terrain for curved surfaces, working different axes, and working very carefully so no part of the terrain is going to create these gaps right here. So now you have multiple techniques and methods of how you want to approach this method of blocking off the curved roads, if you want to use terrain or you want to use BSP geometry. Now let's create, using brushes, a sloped curved surface that's going to wedge right in here and close this gap and give us a smooth surface that will come down with our road. So I'm going to navigate into a top view and we're going to create a brush using the arch, and I'm going to draw this out, making sure that all of our sides here line up with the brush, these two edges, and then go into the perspective viewport and make sure that the top of the road meets the bottom of the road. In the perspective viewport, this is what it looks like. And I'm going to click enter, and we need to set our wall width to 128 because we want this gap to be closed and wedged right in here. Number of sides needs to match the number of brushes, which is 12. And start angle. The start angle for us needs to be, let's try 270. No, let's set it to 90. And then the wedge is right in here. I'm going to click OK. So we have our brush here, and we match it up, and it matches perfectly. Now we can do one of two things. We can leave it as is, and let's say we can extend this up, and depending on the environment you are creating, maybe this is a tunnel of some sort, so we would create another set of brushes the same way on the other end. So let's do that now. Let's cover how we make that into a larger curve. So use the brush again, and we're going to extend this, and this needs to be double the size of 512 by 512, so 1024 by 1024. Now we have this set. The wall width, we're going to set it to 56. If you try anything higher and go in the preview, you can see that it creates a wedge. So we need something lower than that, 256, and I'm using the powers of 2. Number of sides needs to match the number of brushes for the road, which is 12. Preview. This way all of our vertices will line up. And then the arc, I'm going to set it at 90, start angle 90, everything looks good, and add height at 0. Click OK, and I take this and we're going to move it right in here and it matches perfectly. And then we can take this and it's already raised. And here we have two smooth curved surfaces blocking off our road. Now if we bring this down to the road itself, and we wanted to have these two surfaces curve with the road, so all we need to do is go into the vertex tool and make sure we lower each vertex to match the vertex of the road. Going to go into the side view, and I'm going to begin to select each vertex and then lower the grid enough to where we see that each vertex is on the grid, and then we're going to keep on lowering each vertex as we select, moving it all the way down. We do not need to triangulate this brush as we did with our road. Here we reworked every vertex to match the road, and then we can simply take this road, duplicate it, make sure that it lines up with our wedge here, maybe give it a different texture. Also maybe retexture some of these, as well as take this road and move it off to this side here. And let's resize this down, and let's use the vertex tool. Let's select these 2 points and let's bring them down right over here. So this is what we have. We have the road from here curving down with this wedge blocking off the corner of the road, as well as 2 brushes that are helping with closing off these gaps. We can clip this brush by going to the clip tool and going all the way across, making sure that white is what we keep and red is discarded. So now we have a nice clean brush, and then we need to simply Control T and turn it into a function detail. Now with these various techniques of blocking off curved surfaces, using terrain, brushes, and creating wedges or creating curves, now you have everything that you need to know how to block off around the road. You can really begin now and mix and match different techniques depending on the environment you're trying to create. So going back to the example that I showed you earlier, this showcases pretty much all the techniques of blocking off around the road that we covered so far. We have used complex wedges of simple brushes to curve around the road, manipulating every vertex to match the road itself coming down. We also have outer perimeter brush that goes around the curve, and if we go into the top view, this is what it looks like. And then we have multiple terrains that are helping with the environment itself to block off the rest of it. And then coming down here we have simple straight road with terrain on each side, as well as a curved surface with terrain going through it. So using all these various techniques, you can get a better sense of how to block off the environment around the road that we have created. And hopefully that this entire tutorial series showed you that you can confidently create various types of roads. So all these techniques that we covered so far should help you to get a better understanding on how to create roads and block off the environment around these roads.